Hello, PHILO-notes friends. Welcome back for another whiteboard discussion that is intended to help you in understanding the key concepts in philosophy in an incredibly easy way. And so, today, we will address an important question in ethics. What are moral dilemmas? First of all, let us define the term dilemma before we discuss the nature and dynamics of moral dilemmas. A dilemma is a situation where a person is forced to choose between two or more conflicting options, neither of which is acceptable. As we can see, the key here is that the person has choices to make that will all have results she does not want. For example, a town mayor faces a dilemma about how to protect and preserve a virgin forest and at the same time allow miners and loggers for economic development in the town. It must be noted, however, that if a person is in a difficult situation but is not forced to choose between two or more options, then that person is not in a dilemma. The least that we can say is that that person is just experiencing a problematic or distressful situation. Thus, the most logical thing to do for that person is to look for alternatives or solutions to address the problem. When dilemmas involve human actions which have moral implications, they are called ethical or moral dilemmas. Moral dilemmas, therefore, are situations where persons, who are called moral agents in ethics, are forced to choose between two or more conflicting options, but neither of which resolves the situation in a morally acceptable manner. Let's consider this scenario as an example. Lindsay is a deeply religious person, hence she considers killing humans absolutely wrong. Unfortunately, it is found out that Lindsay is having an ectopic pregnancy. As is well known, an ectopic pregnancy is a type of pregnancy that occurs outside the uterus, most commonly in the fallopian tubes. In other words, in ectopic pregnancy, the fetus does not develop in the uterus. Now, if this happens, the development of the fetus will definitely endanger the mother. Thus, if Lindsay continues with her pregnancy, then there is a big possibility that she will die. According to experts, the best way to save Lindsay's life is to abort the fetus, which necessarily implies killing the fetus. If we do not abort the fetus, then Lindsay, as well as the fetus, will die. In this example of a moral dilemma, Lindsay is faced with two conflicting options, namely, either she resorts to abortion, which will save her life, but at the same time jeopardizes her moral integrity, or does not resort to abortion but endangers her life as well as the fetus. Indeed, Lindsay is faced with a huge moral dilemma. According to Karen Allen, there are three conditions that must be present for situations to be considered moral dilemmas. First, the person or the agent of a moral action is obliged to make a decision about which course of action is best. Here, the moral agent must choose the best option and act accordingly. In Lindsay's case, she may opt to abort the fetus as the best course of action. Second, there must be different courses of action to choose from. Hence, as already pointed out, there must be two or more conflicting options to choose from for moral dilemmas to occur. And third, no matter what course of action is taken, some moral principles are always compromised. This means that, according to Allen, there is no perfect solution to the problem. And for this reason, according to Benjamin Labastine, in moral dilemmas, the moral agent seems fated to commit something wrong, which implies that she is bound to morally fail, because in one way or another, she will fail to do something which she ought to do. In other words, by choosing one of the possible moral requirements, the person also fails on others. Now, let's proceed to the different types of moral dilemmas. There are several types of moral dilemmas, but the most common of them are categorized into the following. First, epistemic and ontological dilemmas. Second, self-imposed and world-imposed dilemmas. Third, obligation dilemmas and prohibition dilemmas. And fourth, single agent and multi-person dilemmas. Epistemic moral dilemmas involve situations wherein two or more moral requirements conflict with each other, and that the moral agent hardly knows which of the conflicting moral requirements takes precedence over the other. In other words, the moral agent here does not know which option is morally right or wrong. For instance, I ought to honor my promise to my son to be home early, but on my way home I saw a sick old man who needs to be brought to the hospital. Where does my actual duty lie? We cannot deny that there are conflicting duties here, but we need to note that we want a fuller knowledge of the situation. Is an important purpose being served by my getting home early? How serious is the condition of the sick old man? Indeed, I could hardly decide which option is morally right in this situation. However, one option must be better than the other. Only it needs fuller knowledge of the situation. Thus the term epistemic moral dilemmas. Ontological moral dilemmas, on the other hand, involve situations wherein two or more moral requirements conflict with each other, yet neither of these conflicting moral requirements overrides each other. This is not to say that the moral agent does not know which moral requirement is stronger than the other. The point is that neither of the moral requirements is stronger than the other. Hence, the moral agent can hardly choose between the conflicting moral requirements. For instance, a military doctor is attending to the needs of the wounded soldiers in the middle of the war. Unfortunately, two soldiers urgently need a blood transfusion. However, only one bag of blood is available at the moment. To whom shall the doctor administer the blood transfusion? For sure, we could not tell whether administering a blood transfusion to soldier A is more moral than administering a blood transfusion to soldier B, and vice versa. Now, let's proceed to the second category of moral dilemmas, that is, self-imposed moral dilemma and world-imposed moral dilemmas. A self-imposed moral dilemma is caused by the moral agent's wrongdoings. For example, David is running for the position of town mayor. During the campaign period, he promised the indigenous peoples in his community to protect their virgin forest just to gain their votes. But at the same time, he seeks financial support from a mining corporation. Fortunately, David won the elections, yet he is faced with the dilemma of fulfilling his promise to the indigenous peoples and at the same time allows the mining corporation to destroy their forest. Indeed, through his own actions, David created a situation in which it is impossible for him to be discharged from both obligations. A world-imposed moral dilemma, on the other hand, means that certain events in the world place the agent in a situation of moral conflict. William Styron's famous Sophie's Choice is a classic example. Sophie Tsevitstovska has been asked to choose which of her two children, Eva or Jan, will be sent to the gas chamber in Auschwitz. An SS doctor, Fritz Jemen von Niemand, will grant a dispensation to only one of Sophie's children. If she does not choose which one should live, Dr. von Niemand will send both to their death. Sophie chooses her daughter Eva to go to the gas chamber. Her son Jan is sent to the children's camp. Now, on the third category of moral dilemmas, we have obligation dilemmas and prohibition dilemmas. Obligation dilemmas are situations in which more than one feasible action is obligatory, while prohibition dilemmas involve cases in which all feasible actions are forbidden. The famous Sartre student is a classic example of obligation dilemma. It reads, Sartre uses the anecdote of a former student's moral dilemma during the World War II to illustrate both the limits of making decisions based on a defined moral code and the erroneousness of blaming passions for people's actions. The French student's brother was killed in 1940 by the Germans, but his father nonetheless later abandoned the family to collaborate with the Germans. The student had to choose between staying in France with his mother, who found her only comfort in him, and leaving to fight with the Free French against the German occupation. After realizing he was caught between moral principles, or family and nation, or the obligation to care for his mother and the obligation to avenge his brother's death, he came to Sartre for advice. The philosopher told his student that there was no correct or incorrect decision. Neither moral codes nor the strength of his affections for one or the other party could determine what to do. Rather, the student had to invent his own solution to the problem. On the other hand, the famous Sophie's Choice mentioned earlier is a classic example of prohibition dilemmas. Finally, in single-agent dilemma, the agent ought, all things considered, to do A, ought, all things considered, to do B, and she cannot do both A and B. In other words, the moral agent is compelled to act on two or more equally the same moral options, but she cannot choose both. For instance, a medical doctor found out that her patient has HIV. For sure, the medical doctor may experience tension between the legal requirement to report the case and the desire to respect confidentiality. Although the medical code of ethics acknowledges our obligation to follow legal requirements and to intervene to protect the vulnerable. In multi-person dilemma, on the other hand, the situation is such that one agent P1 ought to do A, a second agent P2 ought to do B, and though each agent can do what he ought to do, it is not possible both for P1 to do A and P2 to do B. According to Benjamin Labastine, the multi-person does not, inasmuch as agents X, Y, and Z may possibly have chosen conflicting moral choices. That is, person X chooses A instead of B and C, and person Y chooses B instead of A and C, and so on and so forth. The multi-person dilemma occurs in situations that involve several persons, like a family, an organization, or a community, who is expected to come up with consensual decision on a moral issue at hand. A family may be torn between choosing to terminate or prolong the life of a family member. An organization may have to choose between complying with a wage law by cutting its workforce or by retaining its current workforce by paying them below the required minimum wage. The multi-person dilemma requires more than choosing what is right. It also entails that the persons involved reached a general consensus. In such a manner, the moral obligation to do what is right becomes more complicated in the multi-person dilemma. On the one hand, the integrity of the decision ought to be defended on moral grounds. On the other hand, the decision must also prevent the organization from breaking apart. That ends our discussion on moral dilemmas, and thank you for visiting us today for another whiteboard edition here at PHILO-notes. Full transcript of this video is available at PHILO-notes.com, and to keep you updated of our newest videos, simply click here to subscribe and tap the bell for notifications. Thanks, take care.